One of the things I want to just expand upon this clip is that Spock and Jim end up best of friends. So this moment of confrontation and then this reaction that was birthed out of that confrontation is not the tone of their relationship. But I want to emphasize to you something this morning, and that is I wanted to show you, and even the responses here. We had some anger come up, didn't we? We had a confrontation that was spoken almost in a challenging way. And then as this confrontation was spoken, something rose up in this other person that you could say, became uncontrolled. I mean, if you know the history of Star Trek, right? Spock is supposed to be half human and half Vulcan, but he has chosen to embrace his Vulcan half. And his Vulcan half is one where it's not that the Vulcans don't have emotions, it's that they realize that emotions, they've chosen to suppress their emotions because emotions get in the way of logic. And so they would rather operate out of logic than emotion. Of course, the big tension in the story of Star Trek between Jim and Spock is that Spock is always logical. He wants to go after it by reason, right? And then you have Jim who's this emotional ball, right? And he's always going after it because of his passion, right? And so Jim comes and he confronts Spock. And Spock, of course, erupts. And then he cools. His dad, who was in the background, who said, "Spock," right? His dad. Aren't you glad for dads? Sometimes it's just those people in our family and those people that know us that actually can speak a word, and that's all it took. And so Spock woke up, so to speak, out of his rage, and he recognized that he was unfit. His emotions had taken over, and he had compromised his capacity to command by Starfleet regulations. All right? There's something interesting as we walk through this journey, and we're in this series on the ways of Jesus. There's this thing that Jesus, by the writings that we're reading, and we're picking up, we pick up these tones and overtones, and we pick up these motives and undercurrents and overcurrents and around currents and through currents, and we see something taking place, a way that Jesus approached people. And I want to suggest to you that one of the ways that Jesus approached people often was confrontational. He would come up alongside of people and he would challenge their belief system. He would challenge their paradigm, you could say. You could even say he challenged their worldview. And as he challenged their worldview, he would press them. He would press them, and then he would press them until what they really believed rose to the surface and leaked out. It's interesting. Jesus didn't seem to be afraid of what people were going to think or how they were going to feel. It seemed like it's not that he wasn't compassionate. It's not that he didn't care for people. It's that he was going after something more important. A truth, something that they were believing, something they were hanging on to that actually, from his perspective, was hanging them up, slowing them down. It was a ceiling for them that he was trying to invite them to break out of and break through. We've been talking about, in the last couple of weeks, we've been talking about the idea of signs and wonders. And that's one of the things that Jesus did too. Jesus came and he did these things that were kind of out of the box for what the crowd that he would engage in. He would be doing some things and they would be going, "There's no way that can't happen." In other words, that was a sign that made you wonder. It was a miracle. It was something that they only heard about in the earlier days of the prophets, but they had not experienced these kinds of things. They were miracles. These actions that were taking place that were actually changing people's lives. Crazy things like people being healed and cripples being, people that were disabled or unable to walk, lame people walking, and eyes seeing, and people raising from the dead, and all these kind of crazy things that people said, this stuff's only in stories. This stuff doesn't really happen in real life. But it was happening when Jesus was engaging people. And so there was something about the signs and the wonders. We talked about them, like that exit sign. The exit sign is pointing to a greater reality. If I want to get out of this building, I just don't go to the exit sign and expect to get out. I got to follow the sign. The sign's going to lead me somewhere. The sign is actually a lesser reality leading me to the greater reality. The greater reality is the exit itself. It's the door, right? Last week we talked about the idea of faith, and we kind of juggled around or kind of massaged this idea. What if we could think of faith, rather than thinking faith is a verb, something that I'm doing, what if faith is actually a noun, and it actually is something that is? And if it's possible that we could stretch our paradigm or worldview and break out of this idea that faith is something that I'm doing, and I get into the idea that faith is a person, faith is a noun, faith is an object. So then I over here, the subject, I almost have to go further, right? Because this is where I put the verb. So let's put the verb here. So now the object is over here. So now the subject is here. Are you with me? Did I fix it? So we have now the subject, I, and now we have the verb, the action piece, but now we have the faith as a noun. In other words, what we're trying to get to is, I want to know, or I want to believe, I want to access what God knows to be true. What God knows to be true. It's interesting, Scripture, it talks about how we are to have the faith of God. We're supposed to believe what He believes, to know what He knows, to actually have confidence in who He is, what He knows to be true. And it's this place where the kingdom of heaven dwells, right here. And when I know who God is, when I know what He knows, I begin to display what He knows, and it leaks over here. So now, you and I, as the subject, you and I have been made to believe, to know, to actually demonstrate who God is. But in order to do that, we have to know this. So we have to have the faith of God. So we talked about that last week a little bit. And all this is online, by the way. If you guys want to go to our website, you can find an archive of teachings there. But this whole series is on that site. But the point being is that for today's sake, I want you to remember that signs are pointing to something. Okay? So when Jesus would do a miracle of some sort, when he would do something that was utterly, it was beyond their natural experience, so as we call it, supernatural. Now, it might not have been supernatural for Jesus, but it was supernatural for them because it was beyond their natural experience. With me? And so here, signs point to something greater. Okay? So say it with me. Signs point to something greater. Let's try it one more time. Signs point to something greater. There's a greater reality that Jesus is trying to engage the people with. One of the things that I've noticed in the church is there seems to be this desire and passion for signs as the object, rather than it's a sign that points to something greater. So let's not get hung up on the sign, because the sign is pointing to something greater. So here's the signs indicate something about that which is pointing to. So while that's a sign, it's specifically an exit sign, so it's pointing to an exit out of the building. Okay? So it's pointing to something like that. So now what I want to walk with you through is a couple of ideas in regards to when Jesus did signs, when He utilized the tool of signs, when the Father's nature was put on display through him. When he was revealing to the people who the Father was, those were the signs. So when he's doing a sign, when he's healing, when he's doing miracles, he's revealing who the Father is. So here's one of these first points that I want to bring up. When Jesus did signs and wonders, when this event took place in Jesus' life, it's interesting to me when I look at that the signs and wonders that he did, the miracles that he did, they involved healing rather than destruction. And I think that's significant. They were always life-giving. They weren't taking life away. And so if our premise is correct, that a sign is pointing to a greater reality, then when Jesus is doing a miracle that's a life-giving miracle, it's pointing to a greater reality about the object that it's pointing to. And so if he's revealing the nature of the Father, if he's displaying the nature of the Father to people, then what he's saying is, see how I'm restoring life? Do you see how healing is coming to that which is broken? The Father is even greater than that. And I think it's significant that he is starting to reveal something about the Father that actually the people they were unaware of. I'll give you an illustration. See, it's interesting that Jesus does not call down fire on resistant people. I'll show you where this is. See, and in fact, he even rebukes. Let's go to Luke chapter 9, verses 51 through 56. I'll show you this scriptural passage because Jesus actually rebukes his followers, his disciples, for thinking that way. So here he goes, right? So when the days were approaching for his ascension, he was determined to go to Jerusalem. This is Jesus, of course. And he sent messengers on ahead of him, and they went and entered a village of the Samaritans to make arrangements for him. But they did not receive him, because he was traveling towards Jerusalem. Okay, behind the scenes, pause. There's this big cultural division that's going on between the Samaritans and the Jews. They just don't like one another, okay? And so there's a little bit of this tension going on in the background, right? So there's this, while the Samaritans by heritage are Jewish, are Hebrew in culture, they are of a different tribe, a different sect, and so the Jews did not like them, and the Samaritans didn't like, they had a prejudice against one another, right? So that's kind of going on in the background. Start going back to verse 54 then. But they did not receive, 53, they did not receive him because he was traveling towards Jerusalem. 54, when his disciples James and John saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them? It's interesting to me that James and John even thought they could do that. They asked Jesus as if they were kind of saying, oh, Jesus is probably going to let us do this. This is going to be really cool. But then verse 55, but Jesus turned and rebuked them and he said, you do not know what kind of spirit you are of. For the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And they went on to another village. Interesting to me, some observations about the passage. Jesus said these words, you do not know what kind of spirit you are of. You know, I used to think about that. I used to think that he was rebuking them, and actually he was saying that comment, you don't know what kind of spirit you are of. In other words, he was ticked at them and he was actually addressing the kind of spirit they just spoke from. And saying almost like this, how could you say such a thing? Why would you even think that? But I wonder if Jesus could have been saying something else. I wonder if his motive came from another place. I wonder if he was really saying this. I don't think you guys know what kind of spirit you're of. I wonder if Jesus was pulling them towards something. I wonder if Jesus was in this rebuke, he was saying, guys, that's not who you are. That's not who you are. I've not come to destroy. I've come to give life. That's who you guys are. You guys don't come to destroy. You guys come to give life. You see, I'm a life giver. Do you know what spirit you're of? See, I think the disciples had a perception of God. I think the whole Hebrew people had a perception of God. And Jesus was coming on the scene, and he was trying to invite them to consider a different view of God. I think the Hebrew people thought God would do such a thing as to call down fire from heaven and consume people. But here, Jesus is going, no, that's not who the Father is. Let me give you a sign. Let me show you these miracles. Let me show you how God is a life giver and not a life taker. Some of the things that you have assigned towards God should have never been assigned towards God. See, the history of their story, the history of Israel's story is their forefathers had made some conclusions. And so, well, if God called down fire before, why wouldn't he call down fire again? And Jesus is challenging something. He's challenging this worldview. He's challenging their religious view. He's challenging their perception of the Father. And Jesus is actually saying to them, guys, you need to be thinking about God differently. You understand? Jesus is confronting something here. He's confronting a system. He's confronting a way of belief. And when Jesus confronts, remember, just like this video, there's this confrontation, and then something's going to rise up in the one being confronted, and then what they really believe to be true is going to leak out. And so James and John, I think it was in the passage, they really believed that God would do such a thing as to kill people. They really believed it. Jesus is challenging that. And even right now, in some of you, you're going, Brent, what are you saying? Are you saying that God doesn't kill people? Just reading the story, guys. Jesus was confronting something. He was confronting something. So he said to them, you don't know what spirit you are of. You don't know what spirit... In other words, from my perception, I'm thinking he could be saying, guys, you're better than that. You're of a life-giving spirit. See, I've not come to destroy. I've come to give men life. I've come to save them from that very thought that you just had. But a comment like this can come from a place where I'll make a comment like this about God if I'm not aware that God is anything different. If I think that God is not generous, then I won't give. And if I think that God will destroy people that I declare as evil, or if I have some kind of permission now to stand up against them and desire their demise because somehow I've determined that they're evil, I'm pushing on something that is not in the heart of God. But I'm actually using God to justify something that's inside of me. So I ask you the question, is it possible that Jesus is revealing something as a sign? And I wonder, he's revealing something about God. Is he revealing something about heaven? Is he revealing something about the way of the kingdom? Is he teaching his disciples that heaven is about life and not death? That the kingdom is about life and not death? See, just a thought, something to consider. Let me give you another point here, another observation we make when we start to look at the idea of signs and wonders, things that Jesus is doing, these extracurricular events, these extraordinary events, when people are healed and life is given and restoration and people are provided for and all that kind of stuff and plenty more than enough, all that kind of stuff, is that this is another observation, is when I watch Jesus do these miracles, let's call them miracles, when we watch them, it seems like that they're not only life-giving rather than life-taking, or they're not only healing rather than destructive, they're also related to this thing called faith. They're related to this thing called faith. Now remember, let's keep faith in this, for the sake of our discussion this morning, let's keep faith in this idea that faith is a noun. And I want to read to you a couple of passages, but as I read them, I want you to think about faith being a noun rather than a verb. Okay, in other words, I want you to think of people being connected to something rather than people working something up. Okay, you with me? Okay, so, because here's the deal with this idea about faith. It seems that the relationships that Jesus is engaging, they're all over the place. They're all coming from different backgrounds. They're all different events, different scenarios. So they're rather complex. Because sometimes Jesus' miracles seem to occur in response to faith, or sometimes they occur, at other times they seem to occur to stimulate faith. It's kind of bizarre out there. But remember that the faith thing I'm thinking about is a noun rather than a verb. And let's see if we can get any more clarification because of that. So one of the things that Jesus does when he engages people, and he engages them with miracles, he's about to change somebody's total, he's going to change someone's life. Like a person who hasn't been able to see at all of a sudden they're going to be able to see. Their life is going to, how many of you would say that's life-altering? Life-altering, okay. Someone who's lame, can't walk, and now all can walk. He all of a sudden can walk. Life-altering, right? Life-altering. So Jesus is engaging people with these life-altering signs. And Jesus, oftentimes, he minimizes his own role. And he says to them, the other person, he says, your faith has made you well. He didn't say, I made you well. Now, Jesus was the one he's the one that was stimulating, let's say, this event. This sign and this wonder. But then in the midst of it, he says, your faith has made you well. But what if it's not your faith as a verb? What if it's your faith as a noun? Does that still work? Does it still play out? And so, for instance, in Luke chapter 8, 48, Luke chapter 8, verses 40 through 48, I'm not going to read all, I just want to read one verse to you. He said to this woman, he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. He didn't say, I did it. What if we saw it as faith as the object, faith as a noun? He had another place. He says, Luke 17:19, he said to him, stand up and go. Your faith has made you well. Luke 18:42, and Jesus said to him, receive your sight. Your faith has made you well. Over and over again, Jesus was saying, your faith has made you well. But what if it's not? I'm going to get it. I work hard enough. What if it was all about me being connected to this? What if it was all about me being connected to a reality I knew to be true? I believed God is who he says he is. What if I believed that God was a life giver? What if I was right here? What if I was connected to what, actually, let's change all that. What if I was actually connected to what God believed about me? What if it's my alignment to who God is that actually brings the demonstration of who he is through me? Now, there are other times when Jesus did emphasize his role. There are other times. He heals a paralyzed man, and when he said these words, so that you may know that I have power on earth to forgive sins. So that you may know. So there was another reason involved there. There was something else. So it wasn't just the idea of him being connected to faith or what God believed about him. So in other words, in this instance, it's almost like Jesus is doing this sign. This healing demonstrates something visible, a healing of a body, so that people will have faith that Jesus can do something invisible. So there's something that visibly took place, so that then they would believe that Jesus could do something that's invisible, something you can't see, like the idea that forgiveness of sins kind of a thing. It's Matthew 9:6. He says this, "But so that you may know that the Son of Man has authority on earth to forgive sins." Then he said to the paralytic, "Get up, pick up your bed, and go home." So sometimes when Jesus does these signs, these events, these extracurricular things, when he does these, he's stimulating faith. Not just because of their faith, but actually stimulating it. Which kind of gives you this indication that there's something more going on here. There's faith, me being connected to what God believes about me already, and what he already knows to be true. And then there's also this stimulation of growth and progress that's also going on somehow in this. That we're actually coming into a greater awareness. But all of it is connecting to who God is, who he is by his essence, who he is by his nature. You with me so far? One other thing, and then I think I'll go far enough for today, but there's a third thing. Because signs and wonders, they also have a symbolic meaning. It's not just to, because of someone's faith, or in order to stimulate awareness or an awakening, but they also have a kind of a secret meaning. There's a secrecy inside of there. It's almost like when he heals, maybe you can work this kind of logic out with me, it's almost like when he heals deafness, there's something symbolic about it that's almost signifying the capacity to hear in my spirit. So his physical ears are healed. Now there's this symbolic, his inner ears are healed, so to speak. So his deafness would signify helping people hear the truth. Like, okay, the same thing, healing blindness. The healing the blindness suggests that he's healing sight that's beyond physical sight. That there's this deep spiritual sight thing that's awakening too. So there's kind of this, or even this idea, this healing paralysis. When he heals paralysis, it might symbolize helping people get moving again beyond where they're stuck, kind of a thing. Something that's been limiting them, they can move again. So there's these symbolic things that are kind of going on, also with these signs and wonders that are happening. But ultimately, the signs and wonders are not the goal. They're to stimulate something. They're to stimulate an awakening, an awareness of what's going on inside of God. In fact, they also they're revealing what's going on inside of God, because they're pointing to an object. They're pointing to a greater reality. So as you read through scriptures, as you're engaging God during the week, as you're contemplating these things, as you contemplate the idea of signs and wonders, think of them as they are revealing something about who God is that's even greater than the sign itself. That God is actually greater than the sign itself. And every time Jesus is showing this, revealing this, it's an invitation again. Jesus is inviting us to consider God differently. I don't know where your culture has been and where you've come from. I know we have a variety of different cultures even here in our midst at one itself. But even if you're a guest coming through, kind of going through town, let this challenge you. Let the sign and the wonder that Jesus did squeeze you until you realize what you've been believing. Because every miracle that Jesus did was a confrontation to something. It was a confrontation to a system of belief, a way of thinking that people had about who God was. Some people had no problem with it, where they already saw God that way. But not others. Others got ticked off. Others got ticked off so much that they actually, Jesus ended up going to a cross because the people group that he was speaking to, he challenged their paradigm so much they actually called him a blasphemous. They actually called him a heretic. Because he was conveying a picture of God that was beyond their capacity to receive. They saw God a certain way. And that was the only way they saw God. Jesus came and challenged that. And he squeezed them. He squeezed them until what leaked out of them revealed itself. But it didn't seem to freak Jesus out. It didn't seem to scare him. He still, his whole purpose of engaging them was to invite them to a greater reality, a greater awareness. So, this week, as you are walking through this Thanksgiving season, next Sunday is our first Sunday of Advent. Can you believe it? Holy cow. Already. But as you walk through this week, and thankfulness is on your lips more than not, because it's the season itself, and we're reminded of Thanksgiving, and I'm thankful. We're reminded of that. As you press through some of the things that Jesus is revealing to you and you're thankful for, some of the things of the nature of God himself that you're thankful for discovering and thankful for the increase in your awareness there. As you're thankful for that, let some of the challenges, welcome the challenges, welcome the squeezing a little bit, that Jesus could very well be trying to shift some paradigms that we have had about God in the signs and the wonders that he actually did. Welcome that squeeze. Knowing that the Father isn't that the invitation isn't squeezing you so that he's going to judge you or condemn you. But he wants you to see what you believed. He wants you to see what you hold to be most dear, what you hold to trust. He wants you to see where it is in your understanding about God that's not what Jesus' understanding about God was. And as Christians, as followers of Jesus, we are not aligning ourselves with Judaism. You understand that? We align ourselves with Jesus. We align ourselves with the Christ. That's why we call ourselves Christians. And so much of what we believe in America especially is not Christianity, it's Judeo-Christianity. And we take with us this combination of things, and some of the combination is actually limiting us in our awareness of who God is. Is it possible to separate the Judeo-Christian component and elevate Jesus and say, wait a minute, Jesus, I want to have your view of who God is. I want to have your view. Because you seem to challenge some of the Judeo viewpoint. Oh, I can feel the squeeze going on. I can feel it. Let's pray together.